I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to Big Book Compendium. I'm going to talk a little bit. Well, I'm going to tell a story to start off with, and it's about a doctor. This is no ordinary doctor. Was a proctologist by the name of Robert Holbrook Smith. An alcoholic we know and love as Dr. Bob. So in 1935, the doctor agreed to meet with a sober alcoholic named Bill, who wanted to meet with him to help himself. But the doctor agreed, and a 5-minute conversation turned into 5 hours. and Bob was blown away that he was a first living human. This guy was a doctor, a first living person that spoke of alcoholism from actual experience. He gave him the allergy obsession concept. Bill wound up staying at Bob's house, helping sober him up. And after several, he stayed there for several weeks, actually, a couple months. And they tried to sober people up in the Oxford group. One guy they had somewhat success for was Dr. Mick or Dr. Mack. And he didn't stay sober, but that was the first person that they actually got through the principles of the Oxford group that they were doing. But they went to all the Oxford group meetings. They started, they were really getting into the tenets of the Oxford group. And, Bob's still sober at this time. And on June 2nd, Bob was going on a American Medical Association convention. He'd hop on a train to go there. And Bill and Bob's wife, Ann, told him not to go because in those days, drinking was involved in those trips, big time drinking. And Bob insisted he would be fine once he was on the train. And as soon as he got on the train, he drank all the way from Akron to Atlantic City. That's a long drive. And not only that, the entire week he was there was in a blackout. He didn't remember anything he did. And he came home on June 7th and immediately humiliated detoxed. 3 days into his detox, he was scheduled to perform a surgery. And in order to have his steadiness of hand during the operation, Bill gave him a bottle of beer and a shot. That would be Dr. Bob's last drink. And usually when he did these early evening surgeries, he would return home around 8 p.m., right? Return home around 8 p.m. And basically what would happen would be there's 9 p.m. rolls around, no Bob. 10 p.m. no Bob. Now think about it. If someone close who's an alcoholic and they don't come home at their time, oh, thank God, they can't stay sober. They're drunk, right? Midnight rolls around, no Bob. And right after midnight, they're sure he's drinking. Bob walks in, sober as can be. So what was he doing for all those 4 or 5 hours? He was making amends. He made amends to his medical staff, to his work associates, to friends. He went to patients' houses and made amends. Because all he did was house calls back then, except he had to do surgery to be in the hospital. He went to, families' houses. He made a lot of amends that night. And he made amends because he was a secret drinker. And he always was worried that because the way he looked at the Oxford Group principles, it was reconciliation. And the way they presented that was to restore a relationship with people, but there's a lot of honesty that had to be involved. And that's what Bill told him, it's not the way it is. He goes, just make it right. And Bill had no idea that's what he was going to do that night. And him being a secret drinker, he thought it would expose him and he would lose his practice. Remember, this is around prohibition just ended. Everyone's kind of climbing out of an ugly pit. That's why he had the fear. So he was really afraid that the people would know he's a drunk, and he would, he didn't want to lose his practice, but he had to go to any lengths. Perhaps the biggest amends he made that night was the Oxford group, because he was going there and he felt bad. He was going there to get patients. He would pass out his card and then he would tell people he's sober and he wasn't. And the Oxford group is when you went through their equivalents of step 5, And what made your amends, you could go to what's called the pulpit and tell your story. Until then, you weren't allowed to. You weren't a member until you did that. And he walks up to the pulpit, and Oxford group members are like, hey, you can't go up there. And he's up there anyways. And he started to make amends, and everyone just let him talk. When he stumbled at midnight that night, sober, it was, June 11th, but June 10th was his last drink. And that is considered the founding day of Alcoholics Anonymous. The importance of his story is not the founding day of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that he could not stay sober without making amends. And he finally did it. And I just saw this quote from Benjamin Franklin. He says, how few are those who have the courage enough to own their faults and resolution enough to mend them. And the thing is we always try to fix and rearrange out here, outside ourselves. I'm going to get the right car, the right job, the right friends, the right, significant other. Why? Because we want to be happy. And we had to go within us to find happiness. Now, you could do that with go to a Buddhist, meditation group, and maybe 3 or 4 years, maybe 2 years, you would get into that area of meditation inside you. But then you're going to hit the darkness of what's inside you, then you have to get rid of that. Same with Taoism and all that. A lot of those, metaphysics groups. But we have 427. And when we go through 427 through our inventory process, writing the stuff down so I can bring it to another, discuss it with another so I can bring it to God and ask God to remove it. And within that, we find happiness. That's all that's left inside of us. But first, we must go fix our destructiveness before we can bring the happiness to the rest of the world. We must make amends. Amends is, means to make right or wrong. And the book tells us many times what that is. You don't have to go these pages. I'm just going to fly through them really quick. They're just short sentences. Page 13 states, I was to write all such matters that I have much ability. There's a right, make right or wrong. 77 says, but our man is sure to be impressed with sincere desire to set right the wrong. And page 80 says, he felt he had done a wrong he could not possibly make right. And 84, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests to continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any mistakes that go along. The reason I read that last one, 84, is because continue. After I do 427, and I start making my amends, I'm in step 10. And that means I'm continuing to do personal inventory and continue to set right any mistakes along with the old ones. And one of the deepest lines in this book about amends is when Bill's talking about his harms to his wife, who he loved. And he says, what would I not give to make amends? We said the same thing. Maybe not amends, but what would we not give to be with that person again, to be friends with that person, to connect to that person again? And Bill ended the sentence the same way we would when we thought that, but that was over now. How often did we, dream on a starlit night of all the friends that we screwed over and all the friends that we pushed away or we were feuding with? Well, man, I wish I could just go to them and see them, but I can't. We wanted to make amends, but thought it was not an option, not possible. And that's the beauty of this here. Here in this book, some of you, book study, have made amends. Some of you are still trying to go are in the process of making your amends, and some, are still trying to make amends. Some have cross-country journeys to go make amends. Some just got their list in step 4, and that's perfect. But the most important thing is now in this book study, it's like, I want to at least take away the fear of it and show you it can happen. The impossible is possible. Last week, we talked a lot about how to write a list and the freedom. So today we're going to discuss how to approach the individual, because there's a right way and there's a wrong way. So many think they have to sell their amends to someone, like explain what they're doing. Like, do I tell them I'm spiritual, or I found God, or I'm on a mission from God? Let's go to 77 and see what it says. So page 77. So it is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce we have gone religious. In the prize ring, it's like boxing ring, they're saying, this would be called leading with the chin. Now, leading with the chin means in the boxing terms where you go up to the guy and really, setting yourself up to be punched. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? Here's why. So we go to a person and we say, I found God and this and that. Here's why we don't do that. And it's perfect. We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. So if I go to the person and say, I'm on a mission from God and I found God and God's running in me, and I want to make amends to you. How can I make it right? Blah, blah, blah. The person's going to automatically, mind's going to shut. Think they're going to brand you fanatic or religious bore. It says right here, the future opportunity is when you go back to that person and they get sober, they're going to go, hey, yeah, man, I need to get sober, but I don't want to do the religious stuff. And they just back away from me. It happened to me before, that's very important. It's the same thing when we create future opportunity. If we're rude to someone, if we have a sponsor and we continue to chase them, sometimes we start to let people go because we don't want to kill future opportunity. But our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. So that's the main condition to make amends. A sincere desire to make it right. He is going to be more interested in demonstration of goodwill than talk of our spiritual discoveries. So I don't need to tell them I'm trying to get right with, God, or mention God at all. I don't need to tell them I'm in recovery. I don't need to tell them I'm in the steps. They probably know it anyways, or they don't care because they're mad at you. I don't need to say I'm here to make amends. I don't need to say I'm on a life and death errand. None of that stuff needs to be said. Like I said, they don't really care. It takes the focus off making amends. And if I'm saying I'm here to make amends to you, and then it sounds forced. One of the maybe the fourth amends I made, I felt for some reason this guy wasn't sober, and if I say I'm making amends to you, I'm doing the 12 steps and I'm on the amends. I'm here to make it right with you. You know what he said? He says, oh, so that's the only reason you're here for? Like it was forced, right? So one thing you hear in recovery, people will describe making amends and they tell the person they're forgiven. This is not about forgiveness. This is about making right. Forgiveness is between you and God, right? And if I go up to any of you and says you're forgiven, you're gonna be like, what the heck? But here's the other question is, do we discuss their faults, their wrongdoings? Remember, the amend is about us, not them. It's for us and not them. Do I say what I did? Absolutely not. The belief, I'm going to say the facade that that drives so many people away from making amends is that we have to go tell them and admit the wrongs and tell them what we did. We just did that with a sponsor and God. And I don't need to do it with anyone else. Also, when I make amends, we're not trying to cause more harm. So if I go to them and say, I'm the guy that was with your wife 5 years ago, or I'm the guy that stole that stuff from your car, injure them or others. That's why unless to do so would injure them or others. It's written in the step. So it's just telling them what we did. And page 69, if you want to go there really quick. And this is another example of injure them or others. I'm going to point a bunch of injure them or others out today. 69 says we must be willing to make amends when we have done harm, provided that we do not bring more harm in doing so. So we must be willing to make amends when we've harmed the person. but not bring more harm in doing so. So if I go and just tell that person what I did, why would I even, again, why would I need to do inventory? I could just do a third step prayer and, do whatever. That's not what we're doing here. And if amends is done, let me go back to where we were. If amends is done improperly, it's not an amends, it's a mess. Let me give you an example of a scenario. And these are ones I've seen before and heard about. Many years ago, someone took money from you. That was me. Sorry. That's not an amends, it's a mess. An amends is, in the past, I was selfish, dishonest. I'm here to make it right. Right? Sounds like the fourth column, right? Another version of a mess I heard before was when someone said this to me, when I first met you, I thought you were a jerk. I want to fix that. And I was like, I felt like a piece of crap all of a sudden. There was a little injury there, brothers, in there. The right amends is, I was selfish. How can I make it right? There's the one I just mentioned a minute ago. 6 years ago, I slept with your wife. Oh, prepare for a black eye. That's not what we're trying to do here. I was dishonest, self-seeking. How can I make it right? I mean, simple as some people have said, I hurt you. I want to make amends for it. You're putting an emphasis on something ugly at the beginning. It's not what we're here for. I mean, it's just, I was, selfish. How I can make it right. No small talk. No, let's go to lunch. I was told not to leave the person's porch. Most guys want to go the first person want to make amends to is not their mom or dad's, it's their ex-girlfriends that kicked them out of the house for being a drunk. And they automatically get the thought that if I ever get sober, they'll take me back. So they run to make amends to the girl, and they go in the house and have lunch and everything else, and then wind up on a date the next night. And it's not what we're doing here. If it's a friend or an ex or anything like that, you tell them how I can make it right, and you say, I got to go. You just ask, can I talk to you for a minute? When I came from an older school, making amends was, now we got texting and emails and all that. I didn't call the people up on the phone. I was told, if you know where they live, knock on their door. That's what I did, but I always tell people, don't leave the porch. You're there for like a couple minutes and that's it. The most important question is, how can I make it right? So you probably heard in there the way that I do it, and it's it's simple. It's you look at the last column in the inventory: selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, fear. Dishonesty, fear. And so I use those words according to it, right? So I just say, in the past with you, I've been selfish, self-seeking, perhaps dishonest, whatever I need to throw in there, whichever one that matches with the amends. You got to remember, is most of these people making amends to, there's resentments, there's harms, not plural, harms. So if you sit there and tell you all the stuff you did to them, it might be there for an hour, right? And I was selfish and self-seeking. How can I make it right? I was dishonest with you. How can I make it right? And when a person's asked me a couple of times it happened, what do you mean dishonest? And I said, I'm just here to make it right. I'm not here to create any more problems. And they usually go with it. That's the way I said every single one of my amends since I walked in the door. And it's a format that works, that's been passed down in the sponsorship line that I'm in, which is very long. Let's go back to the book 77. It says, we don't use this as an excuse to shy away from the subject of God, when we talked about the God a second ago. When it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. If it serves a good purpose, that's the condition, right? Or it gets brought up, right? For myself, I never had to do that. I was questioned about it later. Hey, when you came by my house, were you doing that? And it's like, yeah. The question of how to approach the man or woman, either one, we hated will arise. So we call that an enemy, which we're trying not to have anymore. It may be he has done us more harm than we have done him. And though we may have acquired a better attitude towards him, we're still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, this is old school wording right here, we take the bit in our teeth. Keep your mouth shut. That's what they're saying. It's harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial. That means it enhances our well-being by making amends to an enemy, someone we envision as an enemy, right? It says we go to them in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feelings and expressing our regret. So Bill mentions we go to them in a forgiving spirit. Very interesting here. This is something that goes over the head of a lot of people, even people doing book studies when they explain it. If you have a forgiving spirit, that's called the spirit of forgiveness. And does that mean if I'm going to them in a forgiving spirit, that must mean forgiveness has taken place. So maybe that's a condition in there, that I have to have a realm of forgiveness before I make amends. So if I'm going, if the question is, did Bill trick us into forgiveness? If you look at step 6, it says it's about letting go of the past. Forgiveness is about letting go of the past. They're both the same, except some of them for 6 are defects with harms. But it doesn't mean we don't have resentments against the person. They both free ourselves from continuous pain at the hands of others. And 6, done correctly, forgiveness happens. You cannot let go of resentment without forgiveness happening. And remember what the St. Francis prayer says. It is by forgiving we are forgiven, right? So if guided through 6 through 4 through 7 correctly, we become aware in that third column with the instincts, pride, self-esteem, and all that I am the creator of my pain. It wasn't them, it was me. By the time we get through our amends, not all of them right away, but our demeanor will be, I got to go make right with these people. When we have that element, that right there is a spirit of forgiveness. It's already taking place. And that spirit, I'm going to go make amends to those I hate. I did my 6 and 7, had a spiritual experience. And before that, I told my sponsor, I was adamant about not making amends, maybe on some of them. And as soon as I did a 6 and 7, it wasn't, I woke up and says, oh my God, I was wrong. I go make amends. No, it was like, I was just, after the 3rd amends, I said, wow, I remember saying to myself, I wasn't going to do this. About being driven by something other than ego and, instincts, but you're driven by God. So let's talk about enemies, those we resent. And before we do that, let's talk about what they mention at meetings a lot, because there's a lot of misinformation and confusion. And I'm going to read out of the book. I don't know where it is in the book, but it's called this personal story called Freedom from Bondage. Just one little short paragraph. Freedom from bondage. And this is what it says. If you have a resentment, you want to be free of it. If you pray for the person or thing you resent, you'll be free. If you ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you'll be free. Even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you will find you have come to mean it and want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you will now feel compassion, understanding, and love. Well, first of all, there's not bad directions. It's not a bad thing there, praying for my displeasure towards somebody. First off, I'm doing that in the steps. I'm doing 6 and 7. That's all it's about. Second of all, this is not in the first 164 pages. It's in the personal stories in the back of the book. And the personal stories in the back of the book, exactly what they are. They're stories. You don't find directions in them. You don't, we're here desperately to go over alcohol. And people will follow these passages at meetings and say, this is all I do. They also say, all I do is acceptance is the answer to all my problems. Well, then if you're saying that, then you're avoiding the steps. You know, and those who follow this passage do not truly want to fix data. Though I've had talks with people who say they follow this passage, and they all have something in common. They have, even if they got 3 years, 3 months, or 30 years, they got someone they will not make amends to. And they're not free. They don't want to make amends. And if I could just, you know, do praying away like that, why would I work the steps? I'm going to go to 66 and put up a very important thing about resentment. Page 66. It says, we saw these resentments must be mastered, but how? We cannot wish them away any more than alcohol. We saw they must be mastered. That's a big word, powerful word. But then it says we cannot wish them away. We must master resentments is what he's saying here. That's not going to happen if I'm spending 2 weeks praying it away. You know, there's nothing wrong when you're writing your 4-step and people you resent, praying for the people. I've heard people doing that, but I prefer praying for yourself to get through this because it's for you. If we can't wish away a resentment, how can we pray one away? You know, especially remember the spiritual malady. The spiritual malady is the inability to connect to the spirit within you. I take resentments, I take guilt, I take fear and shove it inside myself. Trying to meditate with that stuff in you, it's like drinking a cup of water that's got that much water in there. You get a little bit and you might not hear anything at all. But when you wipe this stuff out the way the steps does, all of a sudden you connect to an inner resource that just blows your mind with strength, inspiration, guidance, and direction. So I need to do the program. I don't got time to mess around with anything, you know. So we know, you know, we need to make amends for our harms. But what about resentments? What if I have a resentment against someone I never harmed? Let's see what Bill did. Let's go to page 13. And you'll see a paragraph halfway down that says my schoolmate. So this is when Ebby's working with Bill. And this is prior to the 12 steps. They're doing Oxford group steps, but it's almost the same thing. Virtually, except 5. They had 5 and they had 9 and all that. But look what he says here. My schoolmate, page 13, my schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. Step 5, right? We made a list of all the persons I hurt or towards whom I felt resentment. That's step 8. So I'm making a list of all the people I hurt or those I had resentment against. I expressed my entire willingness, this is a prayer right here. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrongs. Never desired to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters at most of my ability. And so Bill just said that he made amends for resentment. You know, and if you have deep-seated resentment with no harm to it, and you cannot shake it in step 6, letting it go, if you can't, go make amends, especially when you're in step 10 and because we're not harming people as much anymore in 10. Maybe the closest we harm someone, we're not stealing and being dishonest like we were. The closest thing we might be is telling someone the truth and it hurts their feelings. But we get resentments pretty easy. We start to judge people, start to say stuff. And if I can't get rid of it by, you know, letting it go in 6, especially with someone you love, like a friend or a sponsor, and you get really upset and you're just like, and for a day you're playing in your head, you probably have to go make amends. And nothing frees you like that, you know. I always say, I say there's no recovery in being a victim. There's also no recovery if I have enemies or if I'm judging, if I'm being judgmental. And that happens a lot in recovery. So if I'm spiritual and claim I'm spiritual, I have enemies, I'm a hypocrite. Now I'm going to go to the oldest book around, the Bible, and say something that says here. And it says, if you say you love God and hate your brother, I call you a liar. Some deep words. Remember, love and tolerance of others is our code. That means to love all, even if we disagree with them. Love your enemies. You know, that's what another thing that Jesus said, right? Pray for those who persecute you. If you only love those who love you, what reward is there for that? If you are kind to only your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Pretty deep words, but you know, Jesus wasn't the only one who talked about this stuff. Jesus was the only one to talk about stuff. The ancient Babylons, who I've read a lot of cool stuff on, they had a saying, we do not return evil, do not turn evil to your adversity. You know, avenge with only kindness the one who does evil to you. Maintain justice for your enemy. Be friendly to your enemy. That's some deep stuff. And then there's Buddhism. And the Buddha says, I used to have this on my wall, shame on him who strikes, greater shame on him who strikes back. Live happy, not hating those who hate you. Overcome anger by kindness, evil by good, falsehood by truth. Do not hurt others in ways that would be hurtful to you. Deep. Only love dispels hate. Hate never dispels love. Latus, the Tao Te Ching, Taoism, return love for hatred. Otherwise, when a great hatred is reconciled, some of it will surely remain. Ooh, how can that end in goodness? And then Yogananda, Self-Realization Fellowship, Yogananda said, have only love in your heart for others. The more good you see in them, the more you will establish good in yourself. Let's go back to the book. So we got that aspect of not having enemies and thinking about it. Because when you strip away resentments and fear and guilt and find that spirit in you, you're going to find out that love is all you are. And it's kind of like when you're a kid and when you learn to read and you can read all the signs on the road and stuff like that, you can start to read. So when you learn to read, you can read wherever you go. When you learn to love, you can love wherever you go. That's one of those beautiful places to be. Back to the book. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. We simply tell him that we'll never get over our drinking until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are here to sweep up our side of the street because it's for us. Realizing that nothing's worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell them what he should do. Here's a condition, very important one. His faults are not discussed, injure them or others, right? His faults aren't discussed. We stick to our own. And here's a condition of mind, how we want to be when we make these amends. If our manner is calm, frank, and that type of frank, you know, that means honest, right? And open. So kind of calm, honest, and open-minded, you could say. We will be gratified with the result. You know, gratified is one of those spiritual words. Contentment, satisfied. How many times do we go through our life not satisfied? That's part of restless cerebral discontent, the discontent part. We'll be satisfied with the results. And when you feel satisfied for that, you fly. You start flying. So here's the truth, what happens when we make amends, you know, to our would-be enemies. Look what it says here. In 9 out of 10 cases, that's pretty good. The unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own faults. So feuds of years standing melt away in an hour or in a second. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise us that we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally, they will offer assistance. You know, never know. It's never happened to me, but it should not matter how, well, let me rephrase that. I've rekindled relationships and they help me out later on in certain ways. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of the office, we have made our demonstration, done our part, it's water under the dam. The one thing is, I'm not saying I disagree with that, But when someone refuses our amends, I pray on it until I feel like it's time to try it again, especially if it's like an ex. You know, you just don't want to write it off because they told you I don't want to talk to you. And especially when we're making amends to like our children and you have an ex has full custody and you haven't talked to the kid in 5 years. If you want to call up the wife, your ex-husband or wife, and make amends to them right there on the phone and say, after she accepts your amends, you want to say, can I please have permission to make amends to my child? And usually they say, well, that's, not right now, or they'll say it's up to him or her, and usually the kid says no. And they'll say no again. They'll say no again. Eventually they say yes. You know what happens now? They friend you on Facebook. They start talking to you, all because we're doing this work. So we don't have to try to make things happen. The steps make it happen. We just walk with God. That's why I say God first, others second, and my needs get met. Always happens that way. Perhaps we committed a criminal offense. I don't think we've done anything like that, have we? A criminal offense which might land us in jail if we're known to the authorities. We're all innocent, right? We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted our incompetence to another person, step 5, where we are sure we'd be in prison or lose our job if we're known. Maybe it's only, petty offense like padding the expense account. I owed amends to drug dealers for doing that. Because at 22 years old, I had this big plan. I was to be a successful drug dealer. And that didn't go very well when you're like your best customer. But eventually I was like collecting for those guys, and I would take $300 here and there. I'd go back and pay them back and make amends. Most of us have done that sort of thing. I remember a friend of mine, and we stole from a storage. And when I went to make amends to the owner, he was deceased. But I got to make amends to his wife, and it was amazing. And it spearheaded me to go pray that day and make amends to him as well, even though he's no longer there. Because I did know the family a little bit. I grew up in a big Catholic community, and everyone kind of knew each other in certain areas. So maybe we are divorced and have remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony number 1. That happens. She's indigent about it and has a warrant out for arrest. This is common form of trouble too. So the thing is, what's amazing is I have a friend that was estranged from his daughters for years because of drug use and imprisonment. And he didn't know anything what to do, and they weren't accepting his amends. And he goes to a meeting, and his friend, who he also had done time with and stuff, goes up to him and goes, "Hey man," they're at a meeting, he goes, "They got a hold of me." My friend's like, "Who?" And he's all, "State Franchise Tax Board. They came after me for my child support." And my friend's like, "Well, they're not coming after me. I haven't heard nothing." The next day they got a hold of him. My friend says it took 26 years to make that amend, but he completed it. Or 23 years. He's got 27 years of sobriety. Amazing guy. And his amazing relationship with his daughters now. On page 76, let's go back there really quick and look at the entry. It says more action, and look at the last sentence to that paragraph, because this is where we're going to look at the shifting of the mindset that happens. Remember, step 9 says we'll be amazed when we're halfway through. Deb promises. This is kind of a variation of that as well. So page 76, the last sentence states, remember, it was agreed at the beginning when we walked in the door of AA, when we did step 1 also, that we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Victory. I'm going to beat alcohol. Let's go back to 79 now. Now let's look at the shift that happens. Remember, I'm trying to beat alcohol, right? Although these repercussions take immutable forms, there are some general principles we find guiding. Now here's the shift. Reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to have a spiritual experience. So we go from any lengths for victory over alcohol, make a few amends, and it shifts to going any lengths for a spiritual experience. Why would that be? The more amends, I mean, what happens, the more amends I make, then the more I want to make. But the shifting is it's you start to experience God, and you want more of God, and God's no longer guiding you. That's why you're shifting over to making more amends, and the ones in the not, the unwilling shift over to the willing. So let's go back to that again, reminding ourselves we go to any lengths for victory. Any lengths to find a spiritual experience. So here is following that sentence is, well, it's actually a comma. This is the 9th step prayer. So when we see prayer or ask, it's a prayer. We pray that we be given the strength and direction to do the right thing. God, grant me the strength, direction, and the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be, because you're trusting God. Great definition of spirituality there is, kindergarten definition of spirituality is to do the right thing. To do the right thing. Think what that means, and here's what any lengths looks like. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We must not shrink at anything. It's an age-old question that I've asked, my sponsor asked me when I was not agreeing with a couple of amends I wanted to make, that I said to my sponsees, and his sponsor said to him too, well, how free do you want to be? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be free? You got to drop being right, even if you think you're right on these amends and what the person did to you. I know I'm right, what he did. It's not about that anymore. See what it says in the book. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we're not too hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious, so she went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life. He's doing the steps, has secured a position, and was getting his head above water. So he's making that comeback. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and says, here I am. We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary. But if he were to be in jail, he could not provide for either family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking for forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if insisted. And of course, she did not. And the whole situation has since been adjusted. I've heard that hundreds of times. I've witnessed that happens. So here's some very smart directions right here. Before taking drastic action, which might implicate another, the person maybe you ran with and did crimes with or whatever, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, ask God to help us, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. So this is another aspect of injure them or others. So if I commit a crime or a harm that I had, let's just say it's a crime, it's implicated with people. Or you go to an ex and just say, I still resent you because you blame that crime on me, you committed, blah, blah, blah. That's not what we're doing, but this is about securing the consent of someone you ran with and stole from, right? I'll give you an example. This guy I owed a bunch of money to, me and my friends. It got really ugly, and he threatened us, so we went and cleared out his garage with a couple other guys. I get here and I wasn't happy about it. It was sad, and I wanted to make amends. So my sponsor said, well, who did you do it with? I said, 2 other guys. We have to go secure their consent, because if you go to that guy and he says, I know it was the other guys, but you get someone else involved, injure them or others. So I went to the first guy who was in recovery. He's like, yeah, go for it, dude. Then the one guy who kind of graduated being, in the HA and stuff, I had to go to him and say, hey man, check this out. Blah, blah, blah. And he's all, nope, can't do that. I asked again, nope. I asked again, nope. He kind of mellowed out over the years, I guess, because I went to him one time and he goes, man, this must mean a lot to you and you're like a different person. Go for it. And I did. It was amazing. Matter of fact, that guy told me, he says, need to make amends to my mom. That was her house. Right. And I go knock on her door and she's like, Stephen Wood, because she used to babysit me. And I asked her how I can make it right. She says, well, come back for coffee tomorrow. And so I went there coffee every day until she was, and moved on. And for almost 10 years, it was like awesome. It says, this brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival. Giving him no receipt, he subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoings as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was in ruin. He felt he had done a wrong he could possibly not make right. And if he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away the means of livelihood. What right he had to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than stand before the Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. He saw he had to place, here's a condition, place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again. Wow. All would be lost anyhow. He attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made explanation. His action met widespread approval, and today he's one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This happened years ago. I've witnessed stuff like this happen. I've seen it happen in AA. Guys show up, and one guy walked into the room one day and I needed to address the group. And he admitted what he had done. He had stole the entire safe out of a meeting. And he went back there and he had saved up the money, which is about $3,000. And I forget exactly what was, it wasn't all, they didn't want all of it, but he was crying and everyone hugged him and crying back and stuff like that. It doesn't happen anywhere but in recovery. The chances are we had domestic troubles, not us, right? Perhaps we are mixed up with a woman in the fashion we wouldn't care to advertise, like pride, right? We don't want people to know about us. We doubt if in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people, but drinking does complicate sex relations at home. This is pretty right on right here. After a few years with an alcoholic, a woman gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely and sorry for himself. He commences to look around in the nightclubs and their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he's having a secret affair with the girl who understands. Remember that one. In fairness, he must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about it? A thing like that. A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he's married. Think about it. If he's married, if he's married to a loyal, courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. We carry emotion. We carry deep emotional, personal shame for committing the past. It's called guilt. And that's one of the things that's hard to get rid of in 6 and 7. But if I go make amends for harms, the guilt I carry Shame. Because here's the thing, like resentments, we blame everybody else, right? But resentment, but guilt, we know we are to blame. That's why it hurts, you know? Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always. We think if she has, in a general way, that we've been wild, should we tell her? Again, that's a tell her the details. No, injure them or others. We could no. Undoubtedly, we admit our fault. Our fault is that where were we to blame? That fourth column. Was I selfish? Dishonest, etc. That's all you say. She may insist on knowing the particulars. She will want to know the woman's name and where she is. Not a good idea. I've seen that happen before, and it gets ugly. We ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. Again, injure them or others. There it is again, involving a name. So if we bring up a name of another person when making amends, injure them or others, or tell the person what we did. If we are sorry for what we have done, God willing, it shall not be repeated. So that's something we can say if we're making amends for a very dishonest act like cheating or something. We don't want to, honey, I don't want to bring anyone's names into this, but God willing, it shall not be repeated. I'm sorry for what happened. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further because injure them or others. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, though we wish to lay down no rule any sort, we've often found this is the best course to take. Our design for living is not a one-way street. It's good for the wife as for the husband. If we cannot forget, so can she. If we can forget, so can she. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy, injure them or others. Don't leave your fourth step laying out on the kitchen table. Don't leave your amends list laying on the kitchen table. Not a good idea. Perhaps there's some cases where utmost frankness is demanded. I never had to do this except when a couple places I stole from. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. That happens. Oh my God, that happens. Each might pray about it, having the other's happiness utmost in mind. Keep it always in sight. We are dealing with the most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked at the flank rather than face-to-face combat. It's as if we have no such complication. There is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say, the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Don't drink. I'm going to not drink and go to meetings. And now everyone home has to deal with the dry drunk and the wife who's so happy her husband is sober, hoping he's going to change. And then she'll say stuff like, man, this is the way he used to be like when he ran out of booze. And it gets ugly. Just because he's going to meetings and not doing the steps. Certainly, he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to his wife or his parents, who for years he has so shockingly treated. I could not imagine making amends for those closest to me, my parents and brothers and sisters. Passing all understanding and the patience mothers and wives have had with us. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes and would perhaps be dead. Let's look at this next paragraph. This is where it gets kind of deep. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring through the lives of others. So we all know what a tornado is. They go about there. They can go up to 300 miles an hour. A tornado's pathway can be can be as long as a mile wide and 50 miles long. But they do over $400 million of damage a year. and destroys everything in their path. They kill thousands. They get thousands and thousands injured. Perhaps they're struck by debris, roofing shingles, broken glass, doors, etc. Right? Houses are destroyed. Large buildings, commercial buildings gone. Bridges are ripped out of the ground. Trees are uprooted completely. Cars and trains are thrown for miles. They completely change people's lives. I'm sure some of you experienced the tornado before or seen it up close. I've only seen the aftermath up close, and it's the freakiest thing I ever saw. The alcoholic life is like a tornado roaring through the lives of others. Hearts are broken. Sweet relationships are dead. Affections have been uprooted. Selfish and considered habits have been kept in turmoil. Did your path of destruction, when you look behind you, almost look like a tornado or look like it? How many miles did your harm spread? How many miles is your furthest harm away from you? How many miles is it away from you? How many miles? You might have a harm 60, 70 miles away. What destructiveness did you cause others? Whose lives were changed forever because of you? If so, why would you want to go make amends? You have to look at that. It says we feel a man is unthinking. It's back to the book. A man is unthinking, inconsiderate. That means when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came up out of the cyclone cellar, find his home ruined, completely gone. And to his wife, he remarks, "Don't see anything about it here, Ma. Ain't you glad the wind stopped blowing?" The more self-centered, that's the most self-centered act we can do, is to make amends, is not make amends for our destructiveness. You hurt people. You destroyed lives. You saw the pain on their face. You saw the look on the pain of children's face. You see the destructiveness behind you. So you write all this stuff down, discuss it with another, and discover what caused it. And it was you. And then you look at your list and refuse to make amends. Say, I'm good. And so many live in that delusion that being sober somehow balances the scale of destructiveness we've caused. That's complete bullshit. It doesn't at all. We just feel a little bit better, but it doesn't change what we've done. Just because a person shakes our hand doesn't mean that they don't remember what we did. We had to clean up the past. I've never known a person who skipped amends make it. And I've been around for 20 years, and I'm taking that quote from my sponsor, my grand sponsor, and his sponsor. They all said the same thing. They all did book studies. They all said that stuff. Now, matter of fact, I've never known a person who did the steps get drunk again. Never. And I'll tell you why. Anyone in here that drank again will first, that did the steps, will first admit, did you make all your amends? Did you do step 10 every day? Did you do step 11 every day? Did you sponsor? It's people always say, stand up and say, I did the steps, and there's always a hole in the armor. I've never known a person that did 4 through 9, made their amends, did 10, 11 daily, and sponsored their ass off that got drunk again. Impossible. You got to remember, is AA without AA in general, with 3 million people, we have a 98% failure rate, 2% recovery rate. But for those who do the steps, it's up to 90%. It tells us that. 75% of this book says. Other people claim 90%. Some people say 100, like I just said. But I hear this all the time. I'm sober. Look at me. I'm alumni of the month. I got 6 months. Doesn't matter who I hurt. I won't hurt anymore. Screw amends. That's the type of person who says, I'm a recovering alcoholic, but they got 6 years of sobriety. Of sobriety, I'll call it. Not sobriety, sobriety. And then they wonder why they're miserable. And they say things like, well, this must be the way everyone feels in here. Except for you fake spirituality guys over there who try to act happy. That's what I've heard say. But the purpose of recovery is way more than sobriety. Sobriety is a small byproduct. Sure, people around us are relieved that we stopped drinking, but they do not forget the hurt and the pain. We have to make right with them. We have to. Not just because we'll drink again, because it's the right thing to do. And like Sam Shoemaker said, it's useless to get right with God when there's people out there who I should be making right as well. Think about that. The thought, the thought of setting right our wrongs, making amends, is scary as shit sometimes. But so was it the thought of quitting alcohol and drugs, and we did that. Right? So was the thought of turning our own life over to God when we're not sure what God is exactly, and we did that. Then we had to write down all our stuff, right? Everything about ourselves, right? And discuss it with a person we barely know. It scared us. We did that. So was letting God remove our defects when we did that. Amends is our last big hurdle. We don't need to stop. The main thing that always stands in the way of making amends is never the other person. It's us. It's us. I made amends because I was drowning. I had no other choice. I was dying, and I was tired of being a dry drunk and Alcoholics Anonymous and never getting past the third step for 3 months. Amends was, to this day, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done. And yes, it's scary. Yes, it's intense. But I no longer wanted to keep, living my life in a box. I didn't want to walk down the street. I wanted to walk down the street, in either direction without looking over my shoulder. I didn't want to have to hide in the grocery store anymore from people. I wanted to go anywhere. So I walked through the fear of making amends, and that helps you with fear. And that led me to a sense of closure and peace. And most of all, the thing I didn't know was coming, healing. Not healing them, healing me. And what I thought was unfixable was repaired and even restored. And I've had relationships reconciled. I'm friends with ex-girlfriends and friends that threatened to kill me at one time. But damage to those, reconciled. Those feuds ended. The childhood relationships that we went back when we were using to borrow money from them or broke those relationships up, they were forgiven and cleaned up. But making amends broke the chains I created, something I believe is impossible. But I can tell you this is, because of amends, I see my past as a gold mine today, because I can share this with others like I'm doing you right now. And each amends brought me closer to the world of the spirit than I could ever dream. I never even knew what was there. Do you see why it's an awakening? The freedom I stand on today is built on amends. And making amends, making amends and seeing, just go out and make amends and see where your feet land. Do that. And remember, it's not for them, it's for you. So next week, we're going to talk about the 9-step promises, and we're going to break those promises down. The ones we hear at meetings, they call the AA promises, but they're really 9-step promises because it says on top of the paper and in the book. We're going to break that down next week. So I'm going to stop the recording.